You're listening to Sophie and Sebastian, a podcast of stories for children. This week's episode is about a visit to the hospital and is dedicated especially to anyone who's sick or sore or just feeling down. Hopefully the story brings you some joy. This story is called The Hospital Visit. One sunny day, Bert was doing something special for Fran. He was washing the windows. There he was, standing on a ladder, with a cloth in one hand and a bucket of water in the other. He was reaching for the top corner of the window when Sophie happened to come by. "Hi, Bert," said Sophie. "What are you doing?" Bert had not seen her coming, and before he could say, "I'm being romantic," he lost his balance and fell off the ladder right onto his favorite rose bush. "Ouch," said Sophie. "That must have hurt." Bert lay on the ground grimacing. He was holding his leg and there were prickles stuck in his arms. "Of course that hurts," he grumbled. "Why did you have to ambush me?" "Ambush?" said Sophie. "What does that mean?" "It means that someone surprises you and you fall into a bush." Bert did not look very happy. "Oh," said Sophie, "I didn't know there was a word just for that. What if you happened to fall on a flower?" Before Bert could answer, Fran came outside. She looked at the ladder, the empty bucket, and then at Bert. "What happened?" she said. "What did you do?" "Take a guess," said Bert. "Do you think I'm taking a nap in a rose bush? Do you think I'm trying out a new form of acupuncture? Or could it be that I was trying to do something nice and happened to have a fall?" "I think," said Fran, "that you are much too old to be climbing a ladder. I told you that you don't have to clean the windows for me." Bert looked very glum, so Sophie said, "I can wash the windows if you like. I'll make sure that nobody ambushes me, not even Sebastian." "Thank you, Sophie," said Fran. "But right now I think we better get Bert to the hospital to check for broken bones." Then Fran phoned for an ambulance to come, and when the ambulance came, everyone had to see what was happening. Sebastian was the most excited. He ran over to Bert. "Can I come?" he asked. "I've never been in an ambulance before." "No, you cannot come," said Bert. "Ambulances are a special reward for old farts like me who try to do too much." "What he means," explained Sophie, "is that you have to be romantic and fall for somebody before you get an ambulance." "It's an ambulance," said Bert. "Which is what I said," said Sophie. Pretty soon after that, the ambulance was on its way with Bert inside, and they even turned the sirens on for a bit, mostly because Sebastian had asked them to. A little later, Sophie and Sebastian went to Mrs. Wilson's house to tell her what had happened. "And the worst thing," said Sophie, "is that it may all have been my fault. I sort of sneaked up on him a bit, and he said, 'I've been ambushed.'" "Yes," said Sebastian, "he was pushed." "No, ambushed." "Same thing." "All right," interrupted Mrs. Wilson. "The question is not what happened, but what you can do to make it better. How about we go visit Bert in the hospital, and we bring him something special? You can make him a card, or bring him a balloon, or maybe even write him a poem." "That's a great idea," said Sophie and Sebastian. And then they were rather glad that Bert got hurt, because now they could go and visit him in the hospital. So the very next day, Sophie and Sebastian went to visit Bert. Mum drove and Mrs. Wilson came along, which was fun too, because Sophie and Sebastian got to take turns pushing her in the wheelchair. When they finally found Bert's room, he was sitting up with his leg in a cast. "Hi, Bert," shouted Sebastian. "We brought you balloons." Balloons? Whatever would I do with those? You just hold them, said Sebastian, and then they cheer you up. Well, thank you, said Bert. Let's tie them to the end of the bed, and when I get grumpy, I will look at them. Do they pop easily? Oh, Bert, said Fran, who was sitting by his side, balloons are not for popping. And don't forget, there are other patients too. Then Sophie noticed that Bert was sharing his room with 2 other patients. Oh, this is perfect, said Sophie, because Mrs. Wilson and me, we made a poem. So now it's not just Bert who can enjoy it. Would you like me to read it, Bert? Do I have a choice? Said Bert. No, but it's nice to ask, said Sophie. Okay, then, I would love to hear your poem. Fire away. Excuse me, said Sophie. You're not supposed to fire away at people, especially not in a hospital. Oh, sorry. Then let's just get the show on the road. That doesn't work either, because we're in a hospital, not out on the road. Well, then please get started, keep going, and then stop. That's better, said Sophie. Now, everyone pay attention, because this poem is about Bert. And we left out the bit about the ambush because that was an accident. Then Sophie read the poem in her most dramatic voice. Look at Bert. He's on a ladder, washing windows, splosh and splatter. There he stands up on a rung, very brave and somewhat dumb. And he's cooing like a dove, and he does it all for love, for he cares about his wife more than even his own life. Oh, someone thinks that he's a bird. How romantic, how absurd. Look at Bert, he's reaching higher, for he has some strange desire to wipe away that dirty stain way up on the window pane. There goes Bert to wipe the streak, where a passing pigeon took a leak. But he couldn't, and he fell with a horrid high-pitched yell. Bert the flirt has hit the dirt. How romantic, how absurd. Look, the neighbors all came out. They had heard Bert's awful shout, and his wife was quick to ask, "Why'd you do this dangerous task?" To which poor Bert replied, "It was for you I nearly died. Oh, dear wife, you must have seen how the window's squeaky clean." Yes, but now the sirens can be heard. How romantic, how absurd. Look at Bert, he's in a cast, and he thinks about the past. And he wonders, oh, what if, and oh, just what I wouldn't give. Till his friends come for a visit with balloons and ask, how is it? And he says, balloons, what for? But I don't feel quite so sore. And that's the story word for word. How romantic, how absurd. Then Sophie asked Bert if he liked it, and she told him which bits were hers. The other patients also thought it was a very nice poem, and they said that Bert was fortunate to have such good friends. Did you say fortunate? Said Sophie. That reminds me. We should play the fortunate unfortunate game. It's perfect for when you're in the hospital. How does it go? Asked Fran. It's very easy, said Sophie. You tell a story and you take turns. Sebastian, you start. Sebastian was happy to help out. Once upon a time, he said, there was a soldier. Fortunately, he had a gun. Unfortunately, continued Sophie, he had no bullets. Who's next? Then they all took turns to finish the story. Fortunately, said Fran, he didn't have to go to war. Unfortunately, said Bert, he had to polish his boots all day. Fortunately, continued one of the patients, he had time to write lovely poems for his wife. Unfortunately, said Mrs. Wilson, the mailman kept his letters and copied the poems for his girlfriend. Fortunately, said Sophie's mum, the soldier had memorized the poems. You can't steal true love when it's written on the pages of the heart. Very good, said Sophie. But unfortunately, his wife was in the hospital. She was very sick. Fortunately, said Sebastian, the soldier went to go see her, and he showed her his gun. Unfortunately, said Bert, she was feeling very tired and couldn't open her eyes. He had polished his boots for nothing. Fortunately, said Fran, she could hold his hand and listen to his poems and share in his dreams. For no matter how you're feeling, you'll always feel a little better if there's someone close to you who loves you. You don't even have to say anything. You just have to be there and touch them gently and maybe pray with them, and then they know that they're safe and that the world is spinning in the right direction. And that's the end, said Sophie. But she did get better, and the mailman was fired from his job. After the story was done, they all got to write their names on Bert's cast. Sophie wrote her whole name, but Sebastian just wrote Seb, because that's much easier. Then they all went home except for Bert, who got to spend a bit more time in the hospital, just until the balloons had cheered him up all the way.